Hello. So I believe sharing is the new shopping. That instead of buying one thing for everything that we might need, we can instead share. Pretty simple idea, because you could actually say that shopping was the new sharing. Because until recently, until the industrial age, everything was shared. You know, that's just sort of headed, or you had to make it yourself. So it's not that startling that we would change back at some point. And what I want to suggest to you is now is that time. And to tell that story, I want to go all the way back to the beginning of the Earth. I want to go forward to industrial civilization. And I want to talk about permaculture as a metaphor, a design metaphor for that journey. So starting at the beginning of the Earth, 4.5 billion years ago, we had nothing. For the next 3.5 billion years ago, we had single-cell organisms. About 1 billion years ago, we had multicellular creatures formed. 500 million years ago, fish. 200 million years ago, mammals. 20 million years ago, apes. 2.5 million years ago, hominids. 200,000 years ago, humans. And about 40,000 years ago is the moment I want to focus on right now. So during a period of great upheaval in Africa, when humanity was needing to leave Africa and spread out, there was a process of natural selection that selected individuals that had a high incidence of the dopamine D4 receptor in their brains. Now this is what evolutionary biologists call the neosensing region of the brain that looks for the next new exciting thing. And it makes sense, as this was a time of rapid change for humanity. So humanity was selecting for people who were interested in going out and finding that next exciting thing. And in some ways that served us all very well. We all explore. We are that explorer class of people looking for the next new exciting thing. And in some ways, it's also made us quite challenged. So it has locked us into a place where we tend to buy to satisfy that new sensing urge. So sometimes we do things that are quite stupid, like this. This is a 6-bladed razor. Now, gentlemen in the audience, sometimes I know you'll wake up and you go, this is a morning where I need 6 blades. Not merely a 5-bladed shave. It's just 3 cups of coffee and a 6. I mean, ridiculous, right? Like, what difference is a 6-bladed shaver than a 5-bladed shaver, than a 4-bladed, than a 3-bladed, than a 2-bladed? But it's a perfect example of incremental innovation that epitomizes today's shopping. It's not something really new. It's just incrementally different, and even that barely. So for me, the journey and the question is, how do we reinvent the way that people see new so that they will shop differently, so that they will acquire differently, and they'll acquire experiences rather than things? Because right now, humanity uses something like 60 billion tons of natural resources each year. And to continue at that rate, we would need something like 3 planets, which, even though we've discovered about 100 billion planets in the universe, there's only one like Earth. So we don't have any others. So on this journey, I found myself working with someone who I never thought I would work with, which is Walmart. And this process of working on Walmart and sustainability was exciting because they set out to do 3 big goals: to be powered 100% by renewable energy, to produce 0 waste, and to sell only green products in their stores, which in 2004, 2005, when we started talking, seemed absolutely outrageous. It's actually been quite successful. It certainly hasn't reached those goals, but it saved millions of tons of plastic. It's kept millions of tons of paper out of landfills. It's reduced its CO2 impact, its additional CO2 impact by millions of tons. But it doesn't really add up. I mean, there's no way you could say that all of those sustainability efforts, while all laudable and good, are actually anywhere near the scale of climate change. So even the biggest company in the world, the largest seller of Twinkies on the planet, can't even make a dent in what is the biggest challenge that we have. And the problem that we were facing there was that at some point, the machine needs to be fed with another new sale. That all the supply chains run one way, largely from east-west, and once someone's done with something, well, it's not my problem. I don't care if the thing breaks, I don't care if you can't return it, I don't care if it's perfectly good, someone else has got to deal with it. And the aftermarkets are far less sophisticated than the initial sale markets. So to kind of interrogate this problem, I want to suggest permaculture as a design metaphor to think it through. Now, permaculture is the study of permanent agriculture. It's a philosophy, agricultural philosophy, and living philosophy started by David Holmgren and Bill Mollison, two Australians in the 70s. And it's a design system based on ecological principles. Who here is familiar with permaculture, to get a sense? So it's kind of exciting, and people are tearing up small suburban lots and making them into permaculture farms. And what particularly is interesting about it is a set of design principles, and I just have 4 here that or 5 here that I want to share, but there's a number of others, about 12, that are kind of quite useful for looking at a design problem, particularly one that has a cultural element as well as a physical element, shopping. So the first is observation, and of course we all know this, but permaculture observation is very intense. Permaculture designers spend a year or 4 seasons looking at something before they even begin to touch it. They usually build a nest high up, some sort of blind, and just observe and sit and observe what happens. They design from patterns to details, but they really search what's the patterns of water, how do things move? They look at the edges. They start at really the edge, and they look for the marginal, and they try to find that and really find the richness in the marginal. They integrate rather than segregate, and they always obtain a yield. They try to find the thing that actually produces a benefit immediately. And this sounds very much like agile development for those of you in the kind of traditional product side, because the idea is let's fail quickly, let's go find something, but let's not just be theoretical for a long time. So let's start with some observation. The first great department store in America was Wanamakers, started in Philadelphia in 1884. And Wanamakers was just created as a temple to new, a place of neophilia. When you walked into Wanamakers, everything hit you as astounding, new, different. It was the first place with those pneumatic tubes to send financial transactions up. It was the first place with written price tags. It was the first place with a money-back guarantee. It was the first place with a restaurant. It was the first place with a pipe organ. It was the first place with installed electric lights. Everything was about it was new. And this wasn't just in America. Harrods in Britain was the first place with an escalator. And the story was that when people went up it, they were so freaked out that there had to be a man with a snifter of brandy giving people that because they would faint. Sort of like Crocodile Dundee. Women in particular were marketed with this and very much targeted as the chief consumer. The typical American woman now spends 8.5 years of her life shopping, about 300 trips to the store a year, and shopping is gendered. About 85% of consumer dollars are controlled by women. Men control car purchases and electronic purchases, and women, for household, control everything else, typically. Of course, everyone is different, and all of us, of course, don't fit into these generalities. If you want to see kind of a catalog of some of these things that we tend to buy, Sky Mall is perhaps the best group of them. This lovely young woman is modeling a slanket. Not a blanket, not a jacket. Everyone needs one, and a 72-ounce mug of coffee. Also in Sky Mall, you will see it's either a very small man or a very large chair. This is someone who's reinvented the banana peel because it wasn't the perfect packaging. We need the next new thing. We're excited by it. We want to have it. Thorsten Veblen, a sociologist, described this as conspicuous consumption. And his definition of conspicuous consumption was, we search for the thing that has the least utility value to signify the greatest greatness of ourselves. So this is called the I Am Rich app that was released early on in the App Store for $999.99. It precisely did one thing, which was to show a red glowing orb on your phone. Ooh, I have the red glowing orb. What does it do? This. It sold 8 copies before Apple shut it down. Here's an ad I saw in the Montgomery BART station in SF this week. We the people can buy anything, anytime, anywhere, freedom! Our civic, our aspiration for civic accomplishment is even eaten by this path towards consumerism. Now, there has been a pushback against this for a long time. In 1912, J.P. Morgan's daughter, Anne Morgan, started an organization called SPUG, the Society for the Prevention of Useless Giving. And it grew very rapidly. It turned out that women who were working in department stores were often required to give very expensive gifts to their supervisors around Christmas time. It would take about 2 weeks' wages. And there was a women's organization that was working on vacation fund and basically very quickly turned out to this sort of anti-Christmas giving theme. This grew to thousands and thousands of women. In New York alone, there were 82 chapters of SPUG. President Roosevelt became a member of SPUG. It grew very rapidly. SPUG. A SPUG is one who belongs to the Society for the Prevention of Useless Giving. I love it. Now there's Buy Nothing Day, which is around Black Friday. This is an artist named Plastic Jesus. And Plastic Jesus goes to Best Buys and puts on these sort of fake displays. This one's called Useless Plastic Box 1.2. It's $99.99. And supposedly people have actually asked, what are the features of this? They'll go and ask, they'll be like, I don't think this is ours. It's a picture I took here in New York. Self-storage has grown extraordinarily. In 1960, there was no such thing as a formal self-storage market. Today, there are over 2 billion square feet used and dedicated to self-storage. We have a lot of stuff. And 80% of the things that we own, we use less than once a month. So we have a lot of stuff. It's sitting in places like storage. And there are nasty ramifications of that. Hoarding is a rapidly growing trend in America. In fact, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, mental illness, which is published every 20 years for therapists to help diagnose mental disease and mental disorders, added hoarding as a new condition this time. And we're seeing it rapidly grow. There's a parallel one called Neomania, which is also called compulsive buying disorder, which affects roughly 6% of Americans who buy and buy and buy and have almost a sexual response to purchasing. So those are observations. This is what shopping looks like, and this is where it came from. And to understand a cultural response, I went to Dharavi. This is Mumbai. This is one of the largest slums in the world. And this is where they filmed Slumdog Millionaire, which is a place with extraordinary health and sanitary problems, but a very strong functioning culture. This is a woman named Sabana with her kids. And Sabana is part of a women's savings circle. And what Sabana does, and her people in her block, is that one person in the community basically comes around to their door and collects a small amount of money, a few rupees, each day. And then the next person does it, the next person does it, the next person does it. And through this sort of collective saving, they're able to build assets. They don't have access to formal credit, and to tackle challenges right in their neighborhood and in their own families. There's 3 simple principles they have beyond this. One is to save every day. That saving is something that has to be a habit, has to be ongoing. To survey your community. They don't believe that anyone except them should have the type of knowledge about what does everyone make, who's sick and who's healthy, what type of taxes do people pay, what do you own? They know a lot of information about each other, but they believe that the government shouldn't have that information, and they certainly believe that Facebook shouldn't have that information. They believe that's their information in core. And third, this philosophy believes that you have to spread the word. So they've taken this and spread it all through Dharavi. And in fact, this woman here, Sheila Patel from Slum Dwellers International, has helped spread this idea all across the world. There are saving circles in Kenya and Mexico and South Africa. There's about 60 million women as part of these types of saving circles. And what Sheila is pointing to right here is a wedding set. Wedding sets are held collectively in Dharavi, in this particular saving circle, so that each person doesn't have to have their own wedding set. When you have a wedding, which hopefully isn't that often, then you can go and borrow the community set. So I took this idea back to San Francisco and figured, maybe we can get people to save in that similar way. Maybe that'll be the way to get people to stop shopping the way they are. And I rapidly found that my friends didn't need me knocking on their door asking them to help save every day. They have things called banks, and they use them, and they're fine. So it wasn't perhaps culturally appropriate for the time. But we did have a lot of stuff. So we designed a little test to see if kids would be interested in acquiring stuff the same way. This is my son Simon. This is my daughter Mila's school. And what we did is we asked the girls to bring in 3 things that they'd be willing to share, to give away to their friends. And we took pictures of them, they posted them on the walls, and then we invited them to come and pick ones if they wanted it. And it was like Christmas morning. They jumped out, so exciting, they got all these things, they ran really quickly. My daughter Mila grabbed like an American Girl doll because she'd always wanted one, I hadn't bought it for her because I'm a horrible father. So she got that, and then she looked at every different picture and looked at the back of it to see whose name was on it, because she wanted to get what Elise had put up, because Elise was one of her best friends. And she didn't really care what the thing was, she just wanted a way to have a relationship with Elise. Super interesting way of consuming, really consuming experiences there, relationships. You're not really consuming them at all, you're just being in relationship. Bill Mollison, one of the founders of permaculture, wrote, "Permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, and of looking at plants and animals and all their functions rather than treating any area as a single product system. Permanent agriculture, human culture, and agriculture." We started Yertle with the idea of taking these and bringing them to life with a very simple mission of reducing the number of new things we all have to buy by 25%. It's an app on an iPhone, and people post items that they are willing to get rid of, much like the girls posted those things on their wall. And if you're interested, you offer credits for them. Credits are a currency of reciprocity. It's a really interesting way to get out of the idea of trading dollars, but instead creating our own currencies for things like this. And you can earn something by giving something away, and you can spend it on anything you want. So perhaps you'll get a jam box, which is a few hundred credits that Monica got. And what we found is that the shopping behavior is very different than what it was in what I saw, at least at Walmart and other places. So this is one Yertler named Charles, who was working with a school that had its music program cut. So he got a bunch of other people on Yertle to basically buy all the instruments that were available on Yertle with their credits and send them to the school. And the school is now outfitted with an entire kind of set of musical instruments. That is not quite typical shopping, but is the type of collective behavior that can happen when people are organized together. So I want to quickly go over those values that we talked about before. Observation, really understanding where shopping came from was the kind of the first core. Did we understand why people needed to shop? What was the value that they got? Looking at edges and valuing the margins. The best ideas for shopping perhaps may not come from the streets of New York, but they might come instead from the streets of Dharavi. Integrate rather than segregate. The example they use in that is traditional agriculture, not traditional, modern agriculture, you take a chicken, you put it in a concrete pen. In permaculture, you put it right in the garden. A chicken in the garden will scratch the soil and turn the soil, will eat insects, they don't eat the plants, will poop and give manure to the field. It's integrated. It's not just one thing. And it obtains a yield. And the obtain a yield is absolutely essential in this form of design because we're blending together the cultural needs along with these great theoretical or aspirational ideas. But unless it actually gets something in someone's hands immediately, unless one of those kids at that school got a guitar, unless Monica actually got that jam box, it's just a great idea, but it doesn't actually do anything. So how can you actually design towards the yield? And I'll just end with this last slide. I'm one who believes that we can get really disgusted by the type of ecological reality we face right now. Or we can understand that humanity actually is self-correcting, that human culture will actually find a way to get around these sorts of sad realities. So I'm one who believes that the hope of the human race lies in its generosity, not in its failures. Thank you.
That was incredible.
Oh.
We were laughing so hard back here. And I bought 26 useless boxes online. But I think every one of us saw someone they know in your presentation, or maybe saw a little bit of ourselves as well. And I thank you for pointing out the 18th century Apple store in John Wanamaker, where everything was different. Talk a little bit more about the challenges to the sharing economy, because you're not the only, you know, there's a whole ecosystem now of Uber and Airbnb, et cetera. And they're growing at a pretty rapid pace, most of them. But what needs to be overcome for them to become more influential, more powerful?
Yeah. Well, to step back, we could define the sharing economy as companies or organizations or efforts that take idle assets and enable them to turn them into productive assets through the application of community and technology. So community in the sense of how do we get a social value, how do we get people involved, and technology, how do we use phones or software to actually match underutilized things. So 2 days ago, I believe, there was a global protest against Uber, where drivers in 5 cities just turned off and tried to
Uber drivers or taxi drivers?
Uber drivers.
Okay.
Uber drivers. And that was the first kind of strike of the sharing economy as we saw it. And you know, the critique of the sharing economy is that it is a way to take low-wage workers and basically institutionalize them, to say it's not just there. We're going to actually compete against each other to lower your own wages, which might be what some people would say a TaskRabbit or others are doing. On the other side, when people say, and many Uber drivers say this, it's, you know, this is a way that I can be flexible, that flexibility is something that normally is only given to higher wage workers, but it's probably the most important thing to allow creative use of your time, or to take care of a sick parent, or to take care of kids, or whatever it is. And that value actually is higher than actually having kind of the stable job that with benefits that other people might want.
We have a great question from the audience. What are the social conditions necessary to allow this mindset to scale? I think you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things is that we need to have a democracy, a functioning democracy. And the reason I sort of showed that quick PayPal ad that said, you know, we the people, you know, can buy anything right now, is that we're attacking the sort of core elements of democracy that we need to deal with all sorts of other problems that are happening. I mean, in Mumbai, for example, there actually aren't those civic structures, so they are building all sorts of things right for themselves. They have to. You know, in the US, we've had them traditionally, and they're breaking down very rapidly. And one of the scary things that I think is happening is that the sharing economy is kind of the blunt edge of pushing off some of the old bureaucratic structures that maintain taxi regulations, hotel regulations, and others. Some of those structures definitely need to go, but in their place needs to be a set of rules to protect the little guy. Yeah. And those don't exist, and sharing economy companies have not, frankly, been quick enough to define those. So the type of transactions that happen on Yertle, for example, don't count as part of the GDP, which is ridiculous, right? That's incredibly productive. Those instruments getting out of closets and into those kids is an economically productive activity, right, but they don't count. Neither do things on Craigslist or eBay or others. And that's a rule change that has to happen.
It seems to me that when you defined the, you know, what a sharing economy company is, idle assets enabled by technology for use by others, et cetera, that's what a bank used to be, right? For money. But banks have evolved into this whole other reason for being. Where do these companies in the sharing economy go? Like, think out 10, 20 years from now, like, can you build a vision for us about what's life like in a more sharing world?
Sure. I mean, in some ways, it's that idealized world we might have in our minds from time ago, when neighbors cooked meals from each other, when people gave rides to each other, when you didn't feel like you had to have everything for yourself in case something went wrong. You don't need to have your own snowblower because someone else has one on the block, and they'll take care of your sidewalk. If you need a ride in a hurry, someone will pick you up and do that. So, you know, in the 90s, the 80s, things became a lot cheaper. There was more disposable income available, so people bought, and you know, this actually is some of the great successes of Walmart to its sense. It made things so cheap that people could get them all for themselves. But in the process, we gained huge consumer debt. We, you know, filled all this self-storage. We had to deal with all this stuff. We developed these mental illnesses. Yeah. So there's a bit of a hangover that we're trying to figure out now.
We were in the back. We were joking about the one illness that has yet to be diagnosed or named is, you know, shoe porn shopping mania, right?
Well, it's also interesting that I mean, hoarding, like obesity, reverse correlates to wealth.
Yeah, of course. You have to be able to afford to hoard, right?
No, it reverse correlates.
Oh, reverse.
So it's actually, you see it more that the poorer you are, the higher incidence of hoarding you have.
Interesting. Huh. And do you see the sharing, like someplace like Yertle or another sharing economy company, do you see that as a fix or an alternate kind of behavior that might change that, or is that just sort of an edge case that is going to always be its edge case?
Well, when you think about right now, that it's easier for me to buy a new coffee maker on Amazon than it is to find one that's perfectly good down the street. I can get that new one that has bauxite that came from Australia, that was produced in China, that was shipped to a distribution center in Chicago and then sent to me in San Francisco. And I can get that done in 24 hours for $30, as opposed to a new one that's sitting idle somewhere, a used one that's perfectly good sitting idle. That's ridiculous, right? So it's like, I think at some point we're going to see the failure of those sort of new models, because there's a bit of a change that we have to decide, okay, it's okay not having everything new. Which is a very hard thing for us to understand. And then when you get to utility, well, we can beat the price on a coffee maker. We can get it faster there than 24 hours because, it's right there. It's not so hard.
One of the other complaints or critiques of modern consumerist culture is that you can't get anything fixed, right? A perfectly good coffee maker, but it has a broken switch, or, one little piece that's cosmetic, and it's much cheaper to buy a new one than to ever get one fixed. Is that a possible extension for what you're doing now? Like, the next step is, now let's fix the easily broken ones and put them back into circulation?
So, quality product manufacturers don't design like that. We're launching a brand partnership with Levi's right now, which for them is a way to express how long their products last. Patagonia is a longtime partner with us, and they have lifetime warranties in their products. And for them, it's like a tragedy that one of their jackets, so beautifully made, is sitting in a closet. It should be out on the trail, so they want to get it out there. It's the best brand marketing you can have, is to get your thing constantly being used.
This is true.
So we need to see the next level of sustainability, not just making the thing so it has less toxics in it, but so that it lasts for a long time and goes over and over again. That's where the doubling of efficiencies.
Well, in our community, we call that heirloom design, right? Something we still covet Eames furniture, for instance, and retro Hollywood posters, and then there's a reason for that, because either it was timeless design, or maybe it was just a pastiche that is now retro design or something like that. But that's a hard mark to hit as a designer, because you're working in a constantly moving culture where all the cultural references are evolving so quickly. I'm not sure timeless design or heirloom design in the moment.
This is the challenge.
Okay. You mentioned this a little bit earlier. There are critiques about the sharing economy. I won't say the hidden underbelly, but one of the critiques leveled at the sharing economy is, yes, it's great that I can rent out a room and I can make a couple extra bucks on that trip that I commute down the peninsula, or selling some of my stuff, or sharing some of my stuff. But the critique is that we live in an increasingly extractive economy where I have to rent my room now in order to stay in my place. And if I'm not selling or sharing the rest of my stuff, I can no longer afford to live where I am. And is the sharing economy making that worse? Is it this kind of pressure on lowering what I can make and raising prices, and so I have to be a sharer if I want to?
I think it is a response to those conditions. I don't know if it's speeding them up per se. The idea of having fewer, better things, Dieter Rams said that, obviously. Yeah. That's not a new idea. The type of economic uncertainty that people face, that I think is the larger soup that we're all swimming in right now. And the truth is that having fixed assets, empty rooms, empty hotel rooms, empty ballrooms, isn't efficient at all. And the most efficient thing we can do is get all those economically powerful resources, those natural resources that are sitting on the shelf not being used. And that's good for the economy and good for people.
And yet the Uber drivers are reacting against something, right, in the system?
Yeah, the best way is to actually we're set up as a California benefit corporation, and there's really interesting looks at how...
Thank you, Suze.
Yeah, and how companies can set themselves up more as co-ops, where people who use the platform can actually own the platform as well, which I think is the next step you'll see in sharing economy companies.
We have another interesting question here, probably our last. People will always seek status. What's the new status symbol in the sharing economy?
So we see two great audiences on Yertle, kind of moms and urban hipsters, millennials, whatever we want to call them. And the status symbol is less. is just having only a few things, but having them be really excellent things.
How do you present less? Like, it's not a logo. You could make a logo that says less, but it seems inherently a contradiction to sort of how do you display your status with less?
Well, I think you visit someone's home, you see their desk,
Okay.
you see what they're wearing.
So we're back to
pretty
minimalism.
quickly.
All designers like that anyway. Great. Les Nessman. Okay. Let's thank Adam.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, good.